There could be no doubt from his behavior that he was aware of my being in the hold, and Augustus thought it possible that he'll be able to get to me if he could put him down. He now hit upon the expedient of sending the note, as it was especially desirable that I should make no attempt at forcing my way out, at least under the existing circumstances. And there could be no certainty of his getting to me without one himself on the morrow as he intended. After events proved how fortunate it was that the idea occurred to him as it did. For had it not been for the receipt of the note, I should have undoubtedly have fallen upon some plan, however desperate, of alarming the crew, and both of our lives would probably be sacrificed in consequence. Probably have been sacrificed in consequence. Having concluded to write, the difficulty was now to procure the means of materials of so doing. An old toothpick was made into a pen, and this by means of filling all together, for the between decks were as dark as pitch. Paper enough was obtained from the back of a letter, the duplicate of the forged letter from Mr. Ross. This had been the original draft. But the handwriting was not being sufficiently well imitated. Augustus had written another, thrusting the first, by good fortune, into his coat pocket, where it was now most opportunely discovered. Ink alone was thus wanting, and a substitute was immediately found for this by means of a small incision with a penknife on the back of the finger just above the nail. A copious flow of blood ensuing, as usual, from wounds in that vicinity. The note was now written as well as it could be in the dark and under the circumstances. It briefly explained that a mutiny had taken place, that Captain Barnard was set adrift, and that I might expect immediate relief as far as the provisions were concerned, but not venture upon making any disturbance. He concluded with these words: "I have scrawled this with blood. Your life depends upon lying clothes." The slip of paper being tied upon the dog, it was now put down the hatchway, and Augustus made the best of his way back to the forecastle, where he found no reason to believe any of the crew had been in his absence. To conceal the hole in the partition, he drove his knife in and just above it, and hung up a pea jacket where he found it in the berth. Which he found in the berth. His handcuffs were then replaced, and also the rope around his ankles. These arrangements were scarcely completed when Dirk Peters came below, very drunk but in excellent humor, and bringing with him my friend's allowance of provision for the day. This consisted of a dozen large Irish potatoes, roasted within a pitcher of water. He sat for some time on the chest by the berth, and talked freely about the mate and the general concerns of the brig. His demeanor was exceedingly capricious and even grotesque. At one time, Augustus was much alarmed by his odd conduct. At last, however, he went on deck muttering a promise to bring his prisoner a good dinner on the morrow. During the day, two of the crew harpooners came down, accompanied by the cook, all three in nearly the last stage of intoxication. Like Peters, they made no scruple of talking unreservedly about their plans. It appeared that they were much divided among themselves as to their ultimate course, agreeing in no point, except the attack on the ship from the Cape Verde Islands, which they were in hourly expectation of meeting. As far as could be ascertained, the mutiny had not been brought up by altogether for the sake of booty. A private pique of the chief mates against the Captain Barnard's for having been the main instigation. There now seemed to be two principal factions among the crew, one headed by the mate and the other by the cook. The former party were for seizing the first suitable vessel which should present itself and equipping it at some of the West India islands for a piratical cruise. The latter division, however, which was the stronger and included Dirk Peters among his partisans, were bent upon pursuing the course originally laid out for the brig into the South Pacific. They're either to take whale or act otherwise, as circumstances should suggest. The representations of Peters, who had frequently visited these regions, had great weight, apparently, with the mutineers, wavering as they were, between half-engendered notions of profit and pleasure. He dwelt on the world of novelty and the amusement to be found among the innumerable islands of the Pacific, on the perfect security and freedom from all restraint to be enjoyed, but more particularly on the deliciousness of the climate, on the abundant means of good living, and on the voluptuous beauty of the women. As yet, nothing had been absolutely determined upon, but the pictures of the hybrid line manager were taking strong hold upon the ardent imaginations of the seamen, and there was every probability that his intentions would be finally carried into effect. The three men went away in about an hour, and no one else entered the forecastle all day. Augustus lay quiet until nearly night. He then freed himself from the ropes and the irons and prepared for his escape. A bottle was found in one of the berths, and he filled it with water from the pitcher left by Peters, storing his pockets at the same time with cold potatoes. To his great joy, he also came across a lantern with a small piece of tallow candle in it. This he could light at any moment, as he had in his possession a box of phosphorus matches. When it was quite dark, he got through the hole in the bulkhead, having taken the precaution to arrange the bedclothes in the berth, so as to convey the idea of a person covered up. Went through, he hung up the pea jacket on his knife, as before, to conceal the aperture, this maneuver being easily effected, as he did not readjust the piece of plank taken out until afterward. He was now on the main orlop deck and proceeded to make his way, as before, between the upper deck and the oil cask to the main hatchway. Having reached this, he lit the piece of candle and descended, groping with extreme difficulty among the compact stowage of the hold. In a few moments he became alarmed at the insufferable stench and the closeness of the atmosphere. He could not think it possible that I survived my confinement for so long a period, breathing so oppressive an air. He called my name repeatedly, but I made no reply, and his apprehensions seemed thus to be confirmed. The brig was rolling violently, and there was so much noise in the consequence of it, it was useless to listen for any weak sounds, such as those of breathing or snoring. He threw open the lantern and held it as high as possible whenever an opportunity occurred, in order that by observing the light, I might, if alive, be aware of the mice. That succor was approaching. Still nothing was heard from me, and the supposition of my death began to assume the character of certainty. He determined, nevertheless, to force a passage, if possible, to the box, and at least ascertain beyond a doubt the truth of his surmises. He pushed on for some time in a most pitiable state of anxiety, until at length he found the pathway utterly blocked up, and that there was no possibility of it making any farther way by the course in which he set out. Overcome now by his feelings, he threw open himself among the lumber in despair and wept like a child. It was at this period that he heard the crash occasioned by the deposit bottle which I had thrown down. Fortunate indeed that the incident occurred, for upon this incident, trivial as it appears, the thread of my destiny depended. Many years elapsed, however, before I was aware of this fact. A natural shame and regret for his weakness and indecision prevented Augustus from confiding to me at once what a more intimate and unreserved communion afterward induced him to reveal. Upon finding his further progress in the hold, his attempt impeded by obstacles which he could not overcome, he had resolved to abandon his attempt at reaching me and return at once to the forecastle. Before condemning him entirely on this head, the harassing circumstances which embarrassed him should be taken into consideration. The night was fast wearing away, and his absence from the forecastle might be rediscovered, and indeed it wouldn't be necessarily so if he should fail to get back to the berth by daybreak. His candle was expiring in the socket, and there would be the greatest difficulty in retracing his way back to the hatchway in the dark. It must be allowed, too, that he had every good reason to believe me dead, in which event no benefit could result to me from his reaching the box, and a world of danger would be encountered to no purpose but by himself. He had repeatedly called, and I made him no answer. I had now been 11 days and nights with no more water than that contained in the jug which he left with me, a supply which it was not at all probable that I hoarded in the beginning of my confinement, as I had every cause to expect a speedy release. The atmosphere of the hold, too, must have appeared to him, coming from the comparatively open air of the steerage, of a nature absolutely poisonous, and by far more intolerable than it seemed to me upon my first taking up my quarters in the box. The hatchway at the time, having been constantly open for many months previous. Add to these considerations that had seen a bloodshed and terror so lately witnessed by my friend, his confinement, privations, and narrow escapes from death, together with the frail and equivocal tenor by which he still existed. Circumstances all so well calculated to prostrate every energy of mine, and the reader will be easily brought, as I have been, to regard his every apparent falling off in friendship and in faith with the sentiments rather of sorrow than of anger. The crash of the bottle was distinctly heard, yet Augustus was not sure that it proceeded from the hold. However, it was sufficient inducement to persevere. The doubt. He clambered up nearly to the orlop deck by means of the stowage, and then, watching from a lull in the pitching of the vessels, he called out to me in as loud a tone as he could command, regardless of for the moment of being overheard by the crew. It will be remembered that on this occasion the voice reached me, but I was so entirely overcome by violent hesitation as to be incapable of supply. Confident now that his worst apprehensions were well founded, he descended, with the view of getting back to the forecastle without loss of time. In his haste, some small boxes were thrown down, and the noise occasioned by which I heard, as will be recollected, he made considerable progress on his falling On his return, when the fall of the knife again caused him to hesitate, he retraced his steps immediately and clambered back up the stowage a second time, called out my name as loud as before, having watched for our lull. This time I found voice to answer. Overjoyed at discovering me to be still alive, he now resolved to brave every difficulty and danger in reaching me, having extricated himself as quickly as possible from the labyrinth of lumber which he was hemmed in. He at length struck at an opening which promised better, and finally, after a series of struggles, arrived at the box in a state of utter exhaustion.